respected. If you are over 50, or if you love someone who is, then what I'm about to share might quietly change the way you look at aging, movement, and even the simple act of waking up in the morning. Because, in a small corner of the world where mornings are still treated like a gift rather than a race, there are people who don't chase youth. They practice something far more interesting. They practice staying alive in the most literal, physical, and joyful sense of the word. Now, I want you to imagine something with me. A quiet Japanese neighborhood just after sunrise. The air is soft, almost like it hasn't decided what kind of day it wants to be yet. You hear a few birds, the faint sound of slippers on wooden floors, and then something very simple. A group of older men and women, some in their 60s, some in their 70s, and even 80s, gathering not in a gym, not in a clinic, not in some expensive wellness center, but right there in the open air, moving their bodies like they are remembering something they were never allowed to forget. And if Richard Feynman were standing there, he wouldn't call it exercise in the complicated, overstructured way we usually do. He would probably smile, scratch his head a little, and say something like, "Isn't it funny? We keep searching for complex systems to stay healthy, when nature has been quietly showing us the simplest tricks all along." Because that's the truth hidden inside this story, not magic, not secret techniques. Just 2 daily movements that Japanese elders have been doing for decades after 50. And what makes them powerful isn't just what they are, but what they prevent, preserve, and awaken inside the human body. But before we even talk about the exercises, I want you to understand something deeper. Most people don't realize this, but aging is not a sudden event. It's not like you wake up one morning, and your body sends you a formal notice saying, "Congratulations, you are now old." It doesn't happen like that. It happens quietly, almost politely. One small stiffness at a time, one less walk, one skipped stretch. One morning you don't feel like moving as much, and you tell yourself, "It's okay, I'll rest today." And rest becomes habit, and habit becomes limitation. And before you know it, your body starts to behave like a house where certain rooms are no longer visited. Feynman used to talk about curiosity like it was a muscle. If you don't use it, it weakens. And the same applies to the body. Movement is not just fitness. It is communication. It is the body talking to itself saying, "I am still here, I am still needed." Now in Japan there is a quiet cultural understanding about this. They don't see movement as punishment for eating food, or as a desperate attempt to reverse aging. They see it as maintenance of dignity. And this is where the first exercise comes in. But I don't want you to imagine a gym routine. Forget that. Imagine something far simpler. The first movement Japanese elders do every day is something that looks almost too basic to matter. It is gentle joint activation combined with full body stretching, often done right after waking up. Some people know it in formal settings like radio taiso, but among elders, it becomes something even more personal. A slow awakening of every joint, from neck to ankles, like they are turning on the body one switch at a time. Now if Feynman were here, he would probably say, "Let's think about what's really happening, not what we assume is happening." Because when you wake up after 50, your body is not broken. It is simply less lubricated, less rehearsed. The joints have spent hours being still, and stillness is not their natural language. They are designed for motion, for tiny adjustments, for continuous feedback. So what these elders do is not stretching in the Western touch your toes and suffer sense. It is something more intelligent. They rotate their shoulders slowly, not to force flexibility, but to remind the joint that it is still part of a living system. They gently move their neck, not to strain it, but to reintroduce range. They bend slightly, not for performance, but for conversation between muscles and gravity. And something interesting happens when you do this consistently. The body stops negotiating against you in the morning. Most people over 50 know this negotiation very well. It sounds like stiffness, hesitation, that moment when you stand up and your knees ask for permission before fully cooperating. But when this first daily movement becomes habit, that negotiation becomes shorter, less dramatic. Sometimes it disappears entirely. And here is where the Feynman way of thinking becomes useful, because instead of saying, "This is good for health," we ask a better question: why does this work? And the answer is surprisingly simple. Movement increases synovial fluid in the joints. It wakes up the nervous system. It tells the brain we are not frozen, we are active. And the brain, being extremely practical, responds by improving coordination and reducing stiffness signals. But Japanese elders don't talk about synovial fluid or nervous systems in the morning. They just move, quietly, repeatedly, without drama. And that is the first lesson hidden here. Consistency beats intensity. A young person might stretch once a week with great effort, maybe even sweat a little, and feel proud. But an elder who gently moves every single day without fail builds something far more powerful than flexibility. They build trust with their body. And trust is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small ways. In how easily you get out of bed. In how confidently you walk to the kitchen. In how you bend down without thinking about it. Now let me take you a little deeper into the second exercise. Even though we won't fully explore it yet, I want it to sit in your mind like a question. The second practice is walking. But not walking as we usually think of it. Not rushed walking. Not destination walking. Not I have to get my steps in walking. This is something different. In Japan, many elders walk with what you could call intentional slowness. A kind of mindful pacing where every step is placed with awareness, not urgency. The heel touches first, then the rest of the foot, and the body follows like a calm wave. Feynman would have loved this, because he often emphasized that understanding comes from observation, not assumption. And if you observe walking closely, it is one of the most complex miracles we perform without thinking. Balance, timing, muscle coordination, breathing, vision, all synchronized without conscious effort. But after 50, this miracle starts to feel less automatic. So walking becomes not just movement, but maintenance of independence. And here is something most people miss. The difference between aging with mobility and aging without it is not dramatic decisions. It is small, repeated choices. It is whether you move today or not, whether you stay still or take a short walk even when you don't feel like it. Japanese elders understand something quietly powerful. The body does not need punishment to stay strong. It needs permission to move every day. And in the next part, we will go deeper into how these two simple exercises don't just protect the body. They reshape how a person experiences aging itself, turning what many fear into something almost like curiosity again. But before that, I want you to hold on to one idea. Your body is not a problem to be solved. It is a system to be kept in conversation. And these elders, in their quiet mornings, are simply refusing to let that conversation end. Now imagine something very ordinary, but I want you to see it differently this time. A man in his 60s wakes up in a small home in rural Japan. Nothing dramatic happens. No inspiring music. No cinematic sunrise. Just a simple morning like millions of others. He sits on the edge of his bed for a few seconds before standing up, and for a brief moment his body does what it has done for years. It checks in with him, not in words, in sensations. How stiff are the knees today? How awake is the lower back? How willing are the ankles to participate in the day? Most people ignore this conversation. They rush past it. They treat it like background noise. But Japanese elders who stay active after 50 have learned something subtle. They don't ignore it. They respond to it. And that response begins with the same quiet ritual we started in part 1, but now we go deeper into what it actually does to a human life over time. Because the first exercise, that gentle full-body joint awakening, is not just about morning stiffness. It is about something more fundamental. It is about keeping the nervous system updated. Feynman would have probably enjoyed thinking about this like an experiment. He would say, we assume the body is static overnight. But is it really? Or is it just waiting for input? And the answer, from a biological perspective, is that the body is never truly at rest. Even in sleep, systems are adjusting, repairing, recalibrating. But when you wake up and remain still for too long, the system starts to lag behind intention. That lag is what people feel as aging. Not pain exactly, not illness, just delay. The delay between wanting to move and being able to move without resistance. Now here is where the Japanese approach becomes fascinating. They don't try to eliminate aging. They try to reduce that delay. So when elders perform their morning movements, what they are really doing is not getting flexible. They are re-establishing communication speed between brain and body. Think about it like this. A young body is like a conversation where the reply comes instantly. You think and the body responds. But an older, inactive body becomes like a conversation with a delay. You think, and then there is a pause, sometimes a noticeable one. Before the body responds, these simple movements shorten that pause. And when that pause shortens, something psychological changes too. Confidence returns, not the loud kind of confidence people talk about in motivational speeches. A quieter version, the kind that says, I can trust myself to move without hesitation. Now let's go back to that second exercise, walking, because this is where the philosophy becomes almost poetic. In many Japanese communities, elders walk not as a task, but as a form of awareness training. They don't just move from point A to point B. They notice the act of moving itself. And if Feynman were observing this, he would probably smile at how something so simple contains so much physics, biology, and psychology at the same time. Every step involves controlled falling and catching. Every shift in weight is a tiny negotiation between gravity and balance. Every breath adjusts rhythm without permission. But modern life teaches us to override this awareness. We walk while thinking about tomorrow. We move while replaying yesterday. We turn a fundamental human ability into background automation. And then we wonder why the body feels disconnected. The Japanese elder approach reverses this. Even their slow walk becomes a form of reconnection. Heel touches the ground. Weight transfers. Body stabilizes. Next step begins only when the previous one is complete. There is no rush to finish walking. There is only walking. And over time, this changes more than posture or stamina. It changes perception of time, because rushed walking compresses time. It creates a feeling that life is always ahead of you, always needing to be caught up with. But mindful walking expands time. It makes moments feel longer, more available, more lived in. And this is where something unexpected happens. People who adopt this habit often report not just physical improvement, but emotional calmness, less anxiety, less internal noise, more stability in thought. Feynman once talked about how understanding something deeply removes fear from it, and the same principle applies here. When you understand your own movement deeply, you stop fearing your own aging body. You stop interpreting every sensation as a problem. A stiff knee becomes feedback, not failure. A slower step becomes information, not decline. And that shift in interpretation is powerful. Because most of what we call aging anxiety is not physical decline itself. It is misunderstanding physical signals. Now let's connect both exercises. The morning joint activation wakes the system up. The mindful walking stabilizes the system throughout the day. One is internal communication. The other is external expression. Together they create something that looks simple on the surface, but is deeply stabilizing underneath. A body that is not confused about itself. And when the body is not confused, the mind becomes quieter too. But here is something important I want you to hear clearly. These practices are not about adding more effort into life. They are about removing unnecessary resistance. Most modern fitness advice after 50 becomes complicated. Protein ratios, strict routines, aggressive goals, transformation timelines. It turns the body into a project. But Japanese elders don't treat the body like a project. They treat it like a relationship. And relationships don't survive through intensity. They survive through attention, a few minutes of daily movement. A few mindful walks, repeated over years, not days. That is what creates the difference. And now as we move forward, I want you to hold this thought with you. Maybe the goal was never to stop aging. Maybe the real goal is to stay in conversation with your body for as long as possible, without interruption. In the next part, we will go deeper into how these two simple practices influence longevity, independence, and even the emotional experience of growing older, in a way most people never expect. When you look closely at people who age well, not just in Japan but anywhere in the world, you start noticing something strange. It is not their diet that stands out first. It is not even their genetics. It is something far less dramatic, almost easy to overlook. They keep moving in small ways that never stopped, not intense movement, not heroic effort, just continuity. And continuity, as Feynman might put it if he were explaining it in his quiet, curious way, is often more powerful than bursts of brilliance. Because nature does not run on bursts. It runs on processes that never fully shut down. So when we talk about these two Japanese elder exercises, we are not really talking about fitness routines anymore. We are talking about a philosophy of not disconnecting from life, Let's go deeper into what happens when these habits are kept after 50, not for weeks, not for months, but for years. The first thing that changes is independence. Not the emotional idea of independence, but the physical reality of it. The ability to stand without hesitation, to bend without planning, to walk without fear of imbalance, to get up from the floor without needing negotiation. These things sound small when you are young, almost automatic, but after 50, they become markers of dignity. And Japanese elders understand something very quietly powerful here. Independence is not maintained by big heroic actions. It is maintained by micro-actions repeated daily. That gentle joint activation every morning does something subtle but profound. It keeps what we can call movement confidence alive. Because the body does not only lose strength with age, it loses certainty. The uncertainty is what makes people move less. Not pain alone, not weakness alone, but doubt. Will my knee support me? Will my back handle this? Will I lose balance if I try? And once doubt enters movement, movement shrinks. But when the body is gently reminded every day that it still works, that doubt never fully takes over. Now let's bring in walking again, but from a slightly different angle. Mindful walking, the way many Japanese elders practice it, is not just about physical stability. It is about emotional stabilization, because walking is one of the few human activities that links body and mind in real time without interruption. When walking becomes rushed, the mind leads and the body follows under pressure. But when walking becomes slow and aware, something balances. The body is no longer just a vehicle. It becomes part of thinking itself. And this is where something almost surprising happens. People who maintain this style of walking often report fewer feelings of helplessness as they age, not because life becomes easier, but because their relationship with movement becomes trustworthy. Feynman once emphasized that the joy of understanding comes from seeing reality as it is, not as we assume it to be. And when you apply that to aging, something changes. You stop assuming your body is declining all at once. Instead, you start seeing it as a system with adjustable variables. Some things slow down. Some things need more attention. Some things respond better when treated gently instead of aggressively. This removes a huge emotional burden. Because fear of aging often comes from imagining it as a single downward slope. But in reality, it is uneven, responsive, and surprisingly adaptable. Now let's talk about something most motivational content avoids: time. Not as hours and days, but as lived experience. One of the most profound effects of these two simple exercises is how they change the perception of time itself. When the body is stiff and disconnected, time feels fast and slightly chaotic. Days blur. Movement becomes something you rush through or avoid. But when the body is gently activated every morning and maintained through mindful walking, time starts to feel slower in a good way, not because life is less busy, but because attention is no longer fractured. Each movement takes its place. Each step is noticed. Each moment has slightly more definition. And that definition creates something very important in older age: presence. Presence is what many people lose without realizing it. Not memory, not intelligence. Presence, the feeling of actually being inside your own life instead of observing it from a slight distance. Now, if Feynman were watching this from a scientific perspective, he might say something like, "Isn't it interesting that attention itself behaves like a physical resource? Use it well, and everything feels clearer. Scatter it, and even simple actions feel heavy." These exercises train attention without calling it meditation. They are physical, but they refine awareness, and that is why they work so well together. Morning joint activation brings attention into the body. Walking distributes that attention into the world. Inside and outside become aligned. Now let's go a layer deeper, into something more emotional. Aging is often described as loss. Loss of strength, loss of speed, loss of flexibility. But what is rarely discussed is what can be gained if movement is preserved: stability, clarity, slowness that feels intentional instead of forced, a quieter mind that no longer fights every sensation. Japanese elders who continue these practices are not trying to stay young. They are trying to stay integrated, because fragmentation is what hurts most in later life. When body and mind stop feeling like they belong to each other, these two simple exercises act like daily stitching, reconnecting what time tries to loosen. And over time, something remarkable happens. The body stops feeling like something you are carrying. It starts feeling like something you are living through. And that shift is everything, because once that happens, aging is no longer experienced as gradual disappearance. It becomes gradual refinement. Now in the next part, we will explore how these practices influence not just physical health, but identity itself, and why many Japanese elders report a surprising sense of peace, rather than fear as they grow older. By the time a person reaches their late 50s or 60s, something subtle begins to happen that no medical report fully captures. It is not just the body that changes. It is the story a person tells themselves about their body. And that story quietly becomes more important than the muscles, joints, or even the actual physical condition. Because two people with almost identical physical abilities can experience aging in completely different ways, depending on one thing alone: whether they still feel at home inside their own movement. This is where the two simple Japanese elder exercises we've been exploring start to reveal something deeper than health. They begin to shape identity. Let's return once again to that quiet morning scene in Japan. An elder slowly moving through gentle joint activations. A slow, intentional walk later in the day. Nothing dramatic, no audience, no achievement being tracked, but something invisible is happening underneath. The body is being reminded daily, you are still part of me, and the mind slowly stops separating from it. Feynman once had this beautiful habit of refusing to accept ideas just because they sounded correct. He would always ask, but what is actually happening here? So let's ask that here. What is actually happening when someone over 50 continues to move like this every day? On the surface, it is circulation, mobility, flexibility. But underneath, it is something more psychological. It is the prevention of disconnection. Because one of the greatest risks in aging is not weakness. It is distance. Distance between intention and action. Distance between thought and movement. Distance between who you feel you are and what your body allows you to do. These Japanese elder practices reduce that distance. And when distance shrinks, something surprising happens. The self feels more continuous, not fragmented, not split between yesterday's abilities and today's limitations, but whole even if slower. Now think about walking again, but not as an exercise. Think of it as a daily agreement between body and world. Every step says, I am still participating, not rushing, not competing, just participating. And participation, especially in later life, is more powerful than performance, because performance is about comparison. Participation is about belonging, and belonging is what gives peace. Many elders who maintain these simple practices often don't describe their experience in technical terms. They don't say, my joint mobility improved by 12%. They say things like, I still feel like myself. That sentence carries more meaning than it seems, because it suggests that identity is not fixed in time. It is maintained through action. Stop moving and the identity slowly becomes memory. Keep moving gently, and identity remains present tense. Feynman would likely appreciate this idea deeply, because it aligns with his core belief that understanding is not about memorizing facts, but about staying in contact with reality. And movement is one of the most direct forms of contact we have with reality. Now let's talk about something even more human. Fear, not fear of injury specifically, but fear of becoming less capable, less independent, less visible, less useful. This fear often grows silently with age, and it changes behavior in ways people don't notice at first. You hesitate more. You avoid certain movements. You choose the easier option, not because you must, but because you are unsure. And over time, avoidance becomes identity. But these two Japanese elder exercises quietly interrupt that cycle, because they reintroduce proof, daily, gentle proof that the body is still responsive, not perfect, not youthful, but responsive. And responsiveness is what the mind needs in order to relax. When the body responds, the mind stops preparing for failure, and when preparation for failure decreases, something else grows. Calmness, not excitement, not motivation, but calmness. The kind of calmness that allows a person to sit, stand, walk, and rest without internal negotiation. Now, as we come toward the end of this journey, there is a final insight that ties everything together. These exercises are not really about longevity in the way people usually think. They are about continuity of self-experience. Because what most people fear about aging is not just physical decline. It is interruption. The interruption of being able to live your life without thinking about your body as an obstacle. Japanese elders who maintain these practices reduce that interruption to a minimum, and what remains is a quieter kind of life. One where movement is not questioned, one where waking up does not feel like negotiation, one where walking is simply walking. And perhaps if we look at it through Feynman's lens of curiosity, we might say this: life is not measured by how fast the system runs, but by how smoothly it continues to run without losing connection to itself. And these two simple daily movements, gentle joint activation and mindful walking, are not just exercises. They are maintenance of continuity. They are reminders that you are still in conversation with your own existence. Now, as we reach the final closing of this story, I want to leave you with something to reflect on. Not a challenge, not a command, just a question. What would change in your life if your body stopped feeling like something you manage and started feeling like something you trust again?